Um, I have a couple of thoughts to share with you, and this is more for the people who are visitors. This class is a class in leadership in an upper division elective at the Parker College. Our university is located in coastal Georgia, and in 3 of the last 4 fall semesters, we've lost an entire week of instructional time. The storms have either come ashore or threatened. So I film a couple of videos and drop them on a YouTube channel so that if we have interruption, then my kids have continuity of education. The only other thing I want to mention administratively for people who are visiting, not for the people in the room, is that I essentially despise online education because they have all sorts of data that no learning takes place. So I have an attendance verification mechanism anytime I post something online. At some point in today's class, I will tell a story that's completely off topic. It'll have nothing to do with leadership. And then at the end of the class, I ask a question. My kids have to toggle in with an email response and tell me the answer to the question. Sometimes the story is fun, or rather factual. Sometimes it's fun. Today is sort of a blend. So with those 2 thoughts in mind, I'm going to get started. Today is a conversation about power, and I certainly hope that you've read the chapter. There's a lot of important stuff there. I'm going to focus on 2 concepts that relate to power. How power is used and how power is acquired, because I think they're just incredibly important. And for that reason, that's going to be my focus. I want to point out, though, that in the chapter, one of the things that I want you all to grab, the last third of every chapter, Yuko does a superb job of telling us how to apply the things that we're learning. And there's a section in there, I don't have the page number in my notes, where he talks about influence attempts, how you would influence team members to accomplish something. And there's a set of like 10 or 12 of them. And they're really quite different. Some of them are harsh, like it's my way or the highway kind of a thing. Some of them are democratic, where we all get in a circle and hold hands and discover the inner children. But the point is that section on influence attempts is a powerful takeaway for you. So please, if you haven't had a chance to get to it, when you read the chapter, pay special attention to them. So today is a discussion about how leaders acquire power and how they use power. And I want to take us back to day 1, to that overview presentation. Yuko defined leadership as a process in which an individual intentionally influences a group of collaborators to accomplish a group task. Pretty simple, pretty durable, pretty powerful. But what he says is that leaders intentionally influence. Now, that's the classic definition of leadership. The classic definition of power in an organizational context is simply the ability to influence outcomes. So the word influence defines power. They're perfectly interchangeable, truly. And I just wanted to make that point. Today is a conversation about power, but if we link it back to the definition of leadership, we see the clear relationship. Now, I mentioned that I was going to focus just on 2 dimensions today. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how leaders use power. I'm going to cite the work of a very, very brilliant scholar named David McClellan. You don't need to remember it, but I need to make that attribution because it's his intellectual property, not mine. And then when we talk about how power is acquired, we'll talk about some of the contributions that Jordan Peterson has made, another psychologist who studies this and has a command of this literature. Now, when Peterson talks about how leaders acquire power, he suggests that it's only one of 2 pathways. You either have power because of competence or because of corruption. Because the answer, the question that Peterson's trying to answer is power legitimate or not? If you acquire power through competence, it's legitimate. If you acquire power through corruption, it's illegitimate. So again, these are such powerful concepts that I really want to focus just on the 2 of them. So when I talk about McClellan's work, David McClellan is a psychologist, Ivy League trained, did a lot of really, really good work in motivation and power. The specific work that I'm drawing from today, he talks about power as being either personalized or socialized, and it comes from a book that he wrote in 1975 called Power, the Inner Experience. No, I get it, it's 46 years old, but Some parts of the Bible are 4,500 years old, and we still see value in them. But McClelland's work on power is really seminal. I mean, it resonates even today. Partly because it's so simple and it's so durable. So here's what David McClelland says about power. This is how leaders use power. And his argument fundamentally is that it's directional. Power flows from a leader outward. And if power flows from a leader outward, McClelland conceptualizes it as socialized power. It benefits others, some collective good, the team member, that sort of thing. Alternatively, since he looks at power as directional, he argues that if a leader directs power inward at self, that's called personalized power. Now think about that. If I'm in a leadership role, I possess power, I have the ability to influence outcomes. If I direct that power outward to benefit others, that's called socialized power, and it's wholesome. And alternatively, if I direct the power inward to benefit self, that's personalized power, and there's no way to say this nicely, it's evil. But people in leadership roles do precisely that. They either direct the power that they have outward to benefit some collective good, or they direct it inward to benefit self. So McClelland's work on power, one of the reasons it's so durable is it's so simple. You know, there are very few things that I can say in the organizational sciences that are black and white. It's one way or the other. Very few things. But this concept of power, either socialized to benefit others or personalized to benefit self, is one of those very few things that is just crystal clear. So again, it's a short, but it's a simple conversation. But McClelland's work on power essentially informs us that that's exactly how leaders use power. And I promise you, I expect that you'll see that in probably every organizational context you're ever in. It won't be lost on you. You'll pick up on it quickly. Now, I want to jump to Peterson's work. It's considerably more complex. What McClelland tells us about power is simply this directional thing. Do we use it outward to benefit others or inward to benefit self? Peterson's work Jordan Peterson's work is this whole notion of how is power acquired? Is it acquired through competence or through corruption? And if it's acquired through competence, then it's legitimate. If it's acquired through corruption, then it's illegitimate. I'll give you examples. I'll actually share one or two of his, and I'll give you examples that I will introduce that are both individual and institutional and even political. So let's talk about the legitimate thing about power. If power is acquired through competence, what that means is that somebody possesses skills and capabilities that legitimately give rise to power. I want to share a story with you that comes from my military experience because I really think it matches up with this conversation. I returned from Vietnam in the fall of 1970, and I had a short leave, about a 2.5-week leave, and I didn't know where I was going. I had about 1.5 years left of active duty. And it turns out that while I was on that leave, I got orders to report to Fort Benning. I was going to be an instructor at the United States Army Infantry School. Well, I was pretty excited about that because that was a neat assignment. Now, one of the programs taught at the infantry school at Benning is a program called the Infantry Officers Advanced Course. It's a 10 or 11 month program. It's like an intensive MBA for career officers. You have to successfully complete if you're going to advance. And the reason I'm telling you this story is we didn't just teach American officers, we taught officers from 55 allied countries. Every class that I taught had Brits and Australians and officers from South America and Lebanese and Israelis. So it wasn't just American officers, it was officers from 55 allied countries. So my last year of active duty was 1972. Well, that was an election year. And I taught, the actual group that I taught with was land navigation, and unsurprisingly, some of our stuff was in a classroom setting. A lot of our stuff was in the woods. So we were in a classroom building at Fort Benning, a day-long class, 4 hours in the morning, break for lunch, and then 4 hours in the afternoon. And at lunch, I sat across the table from an Israeli officer. And he said to me, "Captain Norton, we Israelis have to take our elections much more seriously than you Americans." And I knew there was something behind that, so I said, please continue. And he said, "Our prime minister is analogous to your president. She or he is the chief executive of our nation. And before we will consider someone as a candidate for prime minister, we look at them on 3 dimensions. Are you former military? Do you have any foreign policy experience? Have you ever successfully run a large organization? And you have to score high on 2 out of 3 for us to consider you. So the Israelis are looking at competence, aren't they, when they choose a prime minister? You have to have some demonstrated ability. And again, I thought that story would sort of match up with what we're talking about here. So back to Peterson's notion on competence. I want to give you one that I think is institutional. A little over 3 years ago, I bought a new F-150. Unsurprisingly, I love it. I've been driving Fords since the Earth's crust cooled, I think. So my point is, I have this truck that's a little over 3 years old. What that means is it's been in service for a little more than 1,000 days. And I did a rough estimation. In that 1,000-day service life, that truck has had something between 8,000 and 10,000 cold starts. I get in and put the key in the ignition, bust it off, and drop it into gear. So in this service life of 1,000 days, 8 or 10,000 cold starts, 0 failures. Not one failure to start, not one. So the point is, absolutely everybody at Ford that had anything to do with that truck, people buying material, the engineers who designed it, the production guys who manufactured it, everybody that had anything to do with that truck clearly is competent. Because the product that they deliver is essentially without flaws in this 1,000-day service life. So here we have examples where in that organization there's both individual competence and institutional competence. So to the extent that Ford has market power, it's legitimate. And it's legitimate to say that they have market power because although the last maybe year and a half have been a dumpster fire for the auto industry, with chip shortages and things like that, historically, Ford sells more than 900,000 F-Series trucks a year, and for probably 35 years or more, it has been the best-selling truck and the best-selling vehicle in the entire domestic market. So when I say they've acquired legitimacy and market power and leadership, indeed they have. So I'm not trying to sell you Fords. I'm trying to give you an example of competence, both individually and institutionally, inside an organizational context. Peterson, I'm going to stop for a second and tell that story for attendance verification. You get to roll your eyes because you're here. But again, the whole point is I drop a couple of these videos each fall because that's when we lose the instructional time. I don't want to have stuff up on YouTube. So we had this major event on campus a couple of days ago. Most of you were probably impacted by it. We have a bunch of econ guys in the building, and you've got to love an econ guy because I don't think they were ever hugged as children. I'm just speculating. Most of them come to school on the short bus. Some of them get to ride their bikes if they're close to campus. But we meet them every morning in the parking lot over by lot 41, and they get off the bus, they're all happy, and we do the hokey pokey, put your right butt in, you put your left butt out. And we walk them up to their offices on the 3rd floor, and you've probably noticed this. There's tape running from the econ offices to the classrooms. Well, every semester we take a Sharpie, and we'll put like 10:15 or 12 noon, whatever they have to follow that tape to the classroom. But one of the things that goes on up here on the 3rd floor, and again, I'm speculating, I think there's more Acapulco gold up here on the 3rd floor than there is in all the freshman dorms. Those guys are dope smoking fools. I mean, there's more damn marijuana up here. Look at it, it's marijuana. Look at the wood. So, here's what happened a couple of days ago. One of the econ guys, token on a joint, I guess, got the munchies, left his office, but he left his door open. So he goes to the vending machine to get a bag of Doritos, whatever stoners get, I don't know. And he came back, and he walked in his office, and he was horrified because someone had stolen some truly valuable personal property. Now this is big stuff. This is big stuff. Some rotten son of a buck stole his lunchbox. This was no ordinary lunchbox, y'all. This was a collectible 1981 Power Rangers lunchbox. And if that isn't enough, they took his mittens. Now, econ guys are fragile. They need to wear mittens a lot. So he was devastated. He thought this was a matter of national security. So did he call the local cops? No. He called some federal intel agency like NSA. And NSA overreacted. We had black helicopters everywhere, and every three-letter federal agency was on campus. DEA, CIA, FBI, ICE. There were local SWAT teams running around with their military gear, bomb-sniffing dogs, black helicopters everywhere. Now, they haven't yet found either the lunchbox or the mittens. But y'all, evil has no limits. None at all. Just horrifying. Now, the university, won't surprise you, got him a grief counselor. It's going to be a long, long road back for this man. And somebody set up a GoFundMe page. Just a lot of implications, a lot of disruption. So that's the attendance verification story. The question will come later. So now I want to go back to one of Peterson's examples when he talks about competence. Is power acquired through competence or corruption? And Peterson, Jordan Peterson, this incredibly bright psychologist who studies these constructs, uses an example, the United States domestic airline industry. And he correctly points out that they have flown billions of passenger miles with no fatalities or accidents. Now, sadly, there are accidents every year in aviation, but it's not commercial aviation. It's private pilots and people in business jets and things like that who make mistakes and are simply ill-equipped to respond to the circumstances that they find themselves in. But the level of safety in commercial air travel in the United States is stunning. Billions and billions of passenger miles, decades with no fatalities. So again, everybody in that industry, the people who design the aircraft, the people who build them, the people who maintain them, people who fly them, it's just stunning the level of safety that they have. And again, Jordan is using that, or rather Peterson is using that industry as an example of competence. So now, I want to shift to his conversation on corruption. How do people acquire power illegitimately? And I believe that there are only 5 ways that you and I could ascend into a position of leadership. 2 of them are quite rare. So I'm going to focus on 3. The 2 that are rare are heredity. Charles, Prince of Wales, at some point will be King of England, won't he? And there are other royal families in the world too. But there are still some environments where your blood will put you in a leadership role, this notion of heredity. The other thing that is quite rare, but it happens, it would be a coup, like a military coup. That's what Castro did in Cuba in maybe 1957. I think I'm right on the year, but you could verify that. Castro, with the help of the Russians, deposed a democratically elected president, a man named Batista. And the Castro family has now controlled Cuba for more than 7 years. So the 2 that are quite rare, you can ascend to leadership positions, would be this notion of bloodline, heredity, or a military coup, but they're quite rare. So the 3 that are more common, we are either appointed to a leadership role, or we are elected, or we sometimes emerge. And when I say emerge, sometimes groups they don't have structure. And some challenges put in front of us, so someone will simply emerge and assume a leadership role. But the common paths to leadership are either appointment. That means somebody senior in an organization says, Connor, I now appoint you to this leadership role. Or alternatively, we are elected to a leadership role. So the 2 most common pathways are appointment and election. And when Peterson talks about corruption, getting in a leadership role illegitimately, he talks specifically about 2 things. One is manipulation, and the other is deceit. Now, I want to tell you something about manipulation that's kind of, perhaps it's eye-opening, maybe it's not. Solomon, king of Israel, in roughly 900 BC, wrote a biblical passage that says charm is manipulative. if I am trying to charm Mila, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to exchange insincerity for some personal gain, whatever that personal gain may be. So for 3,000 years, we've known that charm is manipulative. And the reason I want to say about the charm is manipulative piece is what we're talking about is all manipulation is insincere. Somebody's trying to accomplish something. They're trying to get some personal benefit, and whatever they exchange to you is utterly worthless. So the two pathways where we acquire power illegitimately, the first is manipulation, and the other is deceit. We simply pretend to be something we're not. Oh dear, well, that happens a lot, sadly. So as I continue this, I want to give you an example of appointment where I believe that the candidate who was appointed to a senior leadership role literally manipulated, charmed his way there, didn't do it on merit. At this university, we had a president a number of years ago. Hey, Adam. We had a president a number of years ago who ascended the presidency, and he had absolutely no prior experience whatsoever as an executive. He'd come from reproductive medicine. And clearly to me, that means he knows a great deal about the birds and the bees, but not so much about successfully running a large organization. But here's the reason that this particular appointment thing sort of manifests itself in power that is illegitimately acquired. He had no experience whatsoever. No one at this university community, not the faculty or any administrators, ever saw the pool of candidates. We don't know who applied and what their qualifications were. We have no idea what the selection criteria were. The Board of Regents is a group of about 19 people who were appointed by the governors for 10-year terms. And this 19 or 20 person Board of Regents chose this inexperienced candidate. Again, none of us knew who was in the pool. None of us knew what the criteria were. This man just emerged and he was appointed as president. So here's someone whose pathway to a senior leadership role is appointment, which is one of the things we're talking about. And it turns out, this is sad, but it's true. This man who became our president was arrogant, he was dismissive, and he was destructive. And that's a big thing when I say destructive, because I've worked for plenty of dysfunctional bosses in my life. If a boss is dysfunctional, you just figure out what that person doesn't do well and you work around it, because clearly they don't function well. But to be destructive is different. To be destructive is to do damage. And when I say destructive, in this man's first year of office, he drove 6 of the 7 deans off campus. He created such a hostile environment that they left. The 7th dean had only been here 1 year, and if he left then, it would be a career killer. He also drove the best provost whom I have ever seen off this campus. We had a provost who was just extraordinary, had heart for this university, was experienced, was committed, everything you'd want. But he could not tolerate this administration, so he left as well. So in 1 year, this president drove 6 of the 7 deans off campus, as well as the best provost whom I've ever seen. And here's what saddens me. When someone does that, she or he has the power to appoint minions to backfill all those empty positions, right? So this destructive president appointed all these people who were his applause group. Oh, we love you, Dr. Poopy Head, or whatever his name was. I forgot his name. I don't want to say it. Now, he is gone. He is gone. He's at another university doing damage there, I'm sure, but the people that he left behind are doing damage here. Oh, dear. So, again, Dubuque University president is a pretty high-level appointment. And all you really have to do is persuade the Board of Regents that you're all that in a bag of Doritos. It's manipulative, isn't it? Because there's no history. You can't point to any body of work. You can't say, I was the president at Florida State or any other university. So again, it's a useful example of an appointment where the ascension into that leadership role was manipulative, and what that meant is that the power that this person had was acquired illegitimately. And sadly, it was used in ways that were destructive to this university. So I want to not talk now about people who acquire power through election. And I'm going to choose a political environment because we have so many examples. If someone runs for an elective office and it's an executive office, like a mayoral office or a governorship or a presidency, that's an executive position. That's very different than if you run to be part of a legislative body. If I were to run for the Senate, I never would. But my point is, I'd be a member of a deliberative body, there'd be 100 people there, and we would discuss and debate legislation. And I can stand in front of the TV cameras and be silly or whatever, but the point is, I'm one of 100 members. If I'm the mayor, Van Johnson has put mask mandates in place in the city of Savannah because he's the mayor. He has executive power to do that. Gavin Newsom is the governor of California. With his executive power, he has decreed that there will only be electric cars sold in the state after 2035. So my point is, when you're in an executive position, you have a disproportionate level of power. If you're in a legislative position, you don't. You're one of many. Hey, look at our House of Representatives, 435 people. So it's a deliberative body. So when I talk about election, I'm only going to talk about executive positions. Now, in any election in this nation, the only objective that the candidate has to achieve is a simple majority. That's it. One vote more than the other person, literally. There is no elected office that requires anything other than that simple majority. Now, the means that candidates use to achieve that goal, there are typically three. I would invite your contribution if you see others. The first thing is they attack the opponent. They say, Norton's ugly and his mother dresses him funny. I'll give you both of those. It's called an ad hominem attack. They attack the opponent. The second thing that they do, candidates for office, is they only present themselves selectively. They don't talk about failures or bad decisions or whatever. They present themselves selectively, and I understand that. That's how you and I write resumes. We don't put on all the bad decisions we made, do we? So I get this thing about selective presentation, but the point is, if it's selective, it's incomplete. And then the last thing that candidates for office typically do, because their goal is just to achieve a simple majority. What that means is they can't offend or alienate any large group. So what they do is any public statement they make is either generic or uninformative. Here's an example. I've seen this so many times that I've lost count. A constituent will say to a candidate for office, "What's your view on the private ownership of firearms?" Well, here's the answer. I support the Second Amendment because it's a constitutional right, but there should be common sense measures for gun control. Y'all, when we use but as a conjunction, it negates everything in front of it. Cassandra, I love you, but. You see my point? So, if the goal is simply to get a simple majority and not offend any big groups, virtually any public statement will either be generic or it'll be uninformative. They won't tell us anything because they don't want to offend anyone. All they want is to win. They, the candidate, and that's their objective, isn't it? So we understand that. There's nothing new or revolutionary about that perspective. So I'm going to talk about a contemporary example of incompetent leadership. And I want to make it abundantly clear that I'm looking at a sitting president through the lens of leadership. There's absolutely nothing political in what I'm about to say. The Afghan withdrawal, which was accomplished just before August 31st, is the most catastrophic failure of leadership in the entire history of this nation. No one has ever shown worse leadership than what happened with that. And that's on every dimension. That is on the intel dimension. We did not know that we were going to lose the country, that the Afghan government would lose it in 2 days. We couldn't predict 48 hours in advance. Militarily, it was an indescribable failure. We left $85 billion worth of equipment for terrorist organizations. We didn't take it with us. We didn't destroy it. We also evacuated the military before the civilians. We left a fortified military base, Bagram Air Force Base, and did it from a civilian airport because it was closer to the embassy. The geopolitical consequences are stunning for decades. All of our near adversaries now know that we are impotent. I promise you, China will move on Taiwan. Iran will try to annihilate Israel. Putin will try to take back all those Eastern European states that he thinks should be Russian. Every terrorist organization in the world is emboldened because after 20 years, after billions of dollars of blood and treasure, we replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. This Afghan withdrawal, I mean, it's still going to haunt us. It's going to haunt us for decades. It is the most catastrophic leadership failure in the history of this country. And that is because there is incompetence in the White House. That's evidence of it. That's my whole point. This is not opinion. Facts are stubborn things. John Adams was our second president, a very consequential man on many dimensions. And he once said in a trial setting, facts are stubborn things. Facts are verifiable. They are immutable. They can't be changed. And there's no alternative interpretation. So facts are stubborn things. And I'm not going to talk about other things because I don't intend to make this political. I won't talk about the border, COVID. I'm simply talking about a leadership failure because the incumbent in the White House, you can pick it, whether it's deception or manipulation, but we have compelling evidence that it's not competence. And that saddens me. And I would actually say that the only thing, and there's one other dimension to this too that I find very frustrating. Last week, 3 senior military commanders testified under oath before Congress about the Afghan withdrawal. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin did. General, I think the pronunciation is Milley. He's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And then there was another general who was the regional commander for the Afghan region, whose name I've forgotten. All 3 of these men under oath said that they told the president that we should leave behind a force of between 2,500 and 3,500 men. Logistical support, intel, that sort of thing. Now, that is not a new concept. We've done that all over the world since World War II. We've had soldiers in Germany to stabilize Europe, soldiers in Okinawa to stabilize the Pacific region, soldiers on the Korean Peninsula. So leaving behind a residual force is something with which we have an 80-year history, and it's successful. And each of those 3 men said that they gave that direct and specific guidance to Commander-in-Chief, and he ignored it. So again, there's no way to gift wrap this. This is a truly sad example of leadership failure. And because the power was acquired illegitimately through either, you get to pick whether it's manipulation or deceit. You'd have to look at your own experiences in the election cycle. The only thing I would ask you, and this is probably the only takeaway, honestly, I would simply ask that anytime you step in a voting booth, that you thoughtfully choose competence, that you don't key on free stuff or somebody's Twitter behavior, but that you choose whomever you think is competent. Because the consequences of this Afghan withdrawal, as I say, they will haunt us for decades. I know factually that our allies, the British Parliament, this is not some political commentator, the British Parliament, in the intervening months since the Afghan withdrawal, has already said publicly they will not support any American military initiatives because, in these exact words, we betray our allies. That's the British Parliament, one of our strongest allies for more than a century. And now they're backing off because we are unreliable. We make promises we don't keep. So when I say to you the geopolitical consequences are stunning, and they'll endure for decades, I'm not pumping sunshine up anybody's pancakes. This is quite a big deal. So now, this is for the kids who are watching this thing online, if I have to drop this video. This is the attendance verification question, loved ones. What was stolen from the econ guy's office? Be specific. Now, do y'all have any concerns, questions, contributions? Because we slap out of bullets in terms of what I want to share with you. Yes, no? All right, love you. See y'all on Thursday.
Yes.